Hey everybody, welcome back to Therapist Theater. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I'm a practicing therapist in Music City, USA, and every week a guest therapist, counselor, or social worker joins me in theater to talk about a movie that we've seen and what relationships or mental health issues it highlights. Thanks so much for downloading today's show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes, and while you're doing that, you can help other people find it by giving the show a 5-star rating and writing a review for it in the podcast app. Oh yeah, and make sure you tell your friends. You can also stay connected with what's happening in the theater by following us on social media. Links to our accounts are in the show notes. This week's guest is Jared Farley. Jared is a therapist and coach in Nashville who specializes in treating people with anxiety, depression, identity issues, and sexual addictions. Let's get this show started, shall we? Dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Jared, welcome back to the theater. Second round. Can't believe that we're making this happen.
That's right.
And since we're doing it earlier in the morning, it's like a morning show. We both got coffee.
We're live streaming. You can check us out on Twitch right now.
Guys, make sure you smash that like button and hit that subscribe button.
You're Josh and Jared in the morning.
Nice. This episode brought to you by NordVPN.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It's really not brought to you by that, guys. I don't have a sponsor. That's just
you might have to edit that out for, the copyright. Maybe. You might have to pay something.
It just came from I'm a giant fan of Malcolm Gladwell, and his podcast is one of the greatest joys of my life. And he put out a season 3 of it like sometime earlier this year, but in a similar way to what you and Todd said once about not wanting to finish Daredevil because then there wouldn't be any left. Like, I didn't want to hit play on season 3, especially in a pandemic, because I was like, I want this thing to be a joyful thing that I can always go to. But then election stress got so high for me that I was like, listen, I got to go to the well. I got to pull out. Yeah, I got to pull out.
You got to go back.
So I started listening to season 3. And the episode I was listening to this morning, he's in the middle of this like 4-episode arc talking about this guy, George LeMay, that was like an Air Force general who was a proponent and he had his hand in inventing like the B-29 bomber that carried the bombs to Japan. He said at the beginning of the first episode on him that of the list of civilians that are responsible for the most, not civilians, of the list of people responsible for the most civilian deaths, it's like Hitler, Mussolini, Mao, Pol Pot. And he said that this guy, George LeMay, is like not too far behind all those guys.
Wow.
But of course, Gladwell does his ads a little different. He does them very Gladwellian. And the last one I heard before we started was about NordVPN. That was the longest story to make that reference make sense.
With all of this probably getting cut out because you don't have to pay NordVPN a crazy amount of money.
Yeah. Well, welcome back. So being your second time on the show, we have already covered your why therapy. Listeners, if you want to hear that from Jared, just search the archive for his first episode. It's using the film Warrior.
Great movie.
Yeah, that's a pretty tough. That can be a tough word to say too. Warrior.
Not warrior, like a person who worries a lot.
Right.
Warrior, as in a man or woman engaged in the art of combat.
Yes. Yeah. It's like there was an episode of 30 Rock where one of the characters had a movie come out called The Rural Juror. And every time you try to say it, you just end up mush-mouthed.
It's like the lawyer from Arrested Development, Bob Loblaw.
Yeah, who has a law blog. Bob Loblaw's law blog.
Oh, man.
It's perfect.
You're going to have a lot of copyright that you're going to have to pay on this. There's going to be a lot of references.
Oh man. Well, we've already got your why therapy taken care of. So if you want to find that, listeners, search the archive for Jared. So what I would love to start out with today is to ask you if before you became involved in therapy in any way, client, student, practitioner, if you had any kind of idea or concept of what therapy or counseling was, and where did you get that from?
Yeah. So, Josh informed me, for all of you guys listening, that he normally sends these questions ahead of time, and he had forgotten to do that. So he asked me that question about 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to kind of formulate an answer in the back of my mind kind of ever since then.
Listen, we've all been trying to keep our nose above the water for a while now. And unfortunately, my remembrance of emailing things ahead of time is one of the things that has slipped.
Yeah, that's not to cast any shame at all. It's yeah, and this format's different because we're actually not in the same room like we were last time. Josh is being real responsible, and so we're doing this over Zoom. And so, yeah, it's an interesting question. My first foray into what I would consider counseling, I would really define as not meeting with a person who is trained clinically, though I have a lot of experience in meeting with people that are trained clinically. For me, my journey just began in telling my story to someone, sitting with a person who is going to listen. And so I met with this guy, Pastor Dale, and I was 18, so I was young at the time. And I know that there's a lot of people who go to counseling at even younger ages than that. But that was kind of my first experience, my first foray into this world of telling my story. And I'm sure that I had preconceived notions. I don't think I had a specific narrative in my brain of, oh, therapy is for, it's for wimps, or it's for, like a lot of clients that I see will come to me if it's their first time, especially, and whether they admit it overtly or not, there's kind of this idea of there's something more wrong with me than a typical person, and that's why I need to come to therapy. I don't think I had any specific narrative like that, but I do know that there was shame around it, which for me speaks to this idea of whether I heard it through TV or movies or music or some other medium, or heard it overtly from my parents or something, I had somehow learned the message, like, don't talk about this. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I ever heard that overtly. I don't think I ever heard my parents say, we don't talk about that outside this family, or something like that. But yet I'd still learned the message. We don't talk about this. I think of now, there's so many movies and TV shows I could reference that have some type of therapy element in it that would definitely inform what I expect therapy to be like. And I talk about that with clients sometimes. That's a common question I ask them, like, what do you expect to get out of this? Are you thinking this is going to be like a Good Will Hunting moment where, like, you come in and I just keep saying it's not your fault until you have this cathartic release, and then
you grab him by the throat and say, I will end you.
Yeah, that's pre it's not your fault. Yeah. So, like, I have these ideas now, but I think before I had my own experience in telling my story, there was still just this belief, this felt sense of we don't talk about this. And I think that was, that was mostly for me, it was informed by kind of how I grew up. And
well, let me ask you this. So, like, you said that the first time that you, in a very, like, intentional, meaningful way, told your story was to a pastor. Mm-hmm. So I think that is a pretty typical thing. Like most people, when they're experiencing what they might later identify as a mental health issue or a relational conflict or something that they feel like is beyond their scope of either tolerance or ability to address, most people go to their pastor. What do you think it was as your past self that made you think, I want to go to that person and seek help?
So for me, and I don't remember if I talked about this in an episode, whatever it was, in the first time I was on. For me, it was not like, oh, I have the insight and the desire to go and pursue this. It was, you have to go talk to this person. So it was directive.
So like,
and luckily Pastor Dale, he was the head of this counseling center that the church had. And so he had a lot of experience. He wasn't and this isn't a knock on pastors at all. Like not every pastor has the tools, has gained the training to handle the scope of what is in the congregation.
Yeah.
Right? And I think it's a sign of health and a sign of humility that says, okay, there's some things I can help deal with here. And then there's things that are outside of my scope and I'm going to send that out. Luckily, this guy was someone who was able to kind of handle a lot of what I was coming in with addiction and toxic shame and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
So when you were heading into meeting with him to talk, did you have any expectation as to how that would go?
Yeah, we had a great conversation about everything except for the real reason I was there, which is, in my experience, pretty common with especially the first session, first therapy, first, time ever. So, I remember him asking me about my family, and I remember feeling like that was pretty standard. That was something we were going to talk about, was like, childhood. And I think I remember kind of having this idea of like, oh, like he's going to talk about like repressed memories and all that kind of stuff. But really my experience with Dale was, like he was just curious about me, and I think that's one of the most healing things that a person could experience is when somebody is just curious about them. It's for me and the work I do with clients, it's on par with overt physical abuse. And this may sound dramatic, and if you have questions, you can email me or you can meet with me in session and we can talk about it. But for me, disinterest, a lack of curiosity, that's neglect. When I'm not being pursued as a being, in the famous words of Albus Dumbledore, neglect and indifference often do more damage than outright harm, because it's more subtle. And so for me to have somebody just be curious was really helpful and healing. And for me, it became a place. I have a group that I'm a part of, and this morning our group facilitator literally said, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something along the lines of, the healing comes from being able to talk about the system and like what's going on. Like that's where the healing comes in, being able to point to and say, hey, this system is happening. And the dysfunction only remains dysfunctional as long as we don't talk about the system. It's like the Matrix, right? Actually,
isn't it more like Fight Club?
For me, it's actually more like Inception. So there's this scene in Inception, and this isn't the movie we're talking about, right? But there's a scene in Inception where the characters are like walking around, and it's Cobb, which is Leonardo DiCaprio's character. It's his dream, and so all these people around are projections of his subconscious. And the person who's designing the world of the dream, she's not developing these mazes well enough for his subconscious to be distracted by. So they're starting to notice that she's around and she's a foreign entity. And so Cobb makes this analogy. They'll be attracted to the foreign presence like white blood cells to bacteria or to a virus. And that's what eventually happens. Like when you start talking about the system and point it out, the system will attack.
Yeah, it's homeostasis. It's the system's ability or desire to return itself back to status
normal.
Quo. Yeah.
Yeah. And the status quo is we're not going to talk about this.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like from what you're saying that Pastor Dave's curiosity was Pastor Dale's curiosity was a very healing and helpful thing. I think what I'm wondering though is, instead of what happened in the first session, what did you think would happen before the first session?
I'd want to go in and be fixed and then leave and be done.
So kind of like here's my problem.
Yeah.
And then you tell me how to fix it.
Very much so like Western medicine. I have an ailment. You're the professional. Like, tell me what to do. Give me a pill. Do something. Like, give me a prescription.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll get over this. And then I won't have to see you anymore.
So like a one-stop shop.
And not even that it would be like a one session kind of deal, but there was this conditioning I'd have. Like that's what we believe healthcare looks like, right? Like I'm sick. I go in, I meet with a professional. They give me a prescription for something and I leave and I'm good. And so I brought that into this as well. And I wanted it to be something quick, easy, short term, not a whole lot of people would have to know about it kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So now that, and you said you were 18 at the time. Mm-hmm. So we're, 10, 11 years later now. Mm-hmm. You have been to therapy a bunch. You have been a student of therapy a bunch. You have been a therapist a bunch. How has that concept or belief about how therapy works, how has it changed in the time in between?
Yeah, I think even just part of what you highlighted, like I'm still a client, right? Mm-hmm. And I've done a crap ton of work and spent a crap ton of money doing the work. I've lost weeks, days, months. Like if you just count the number of hours that I've been doing some kind of recovery work. And if you'd asked me at 18,
I don't know if I would say that was a loss, but
no, right. No. Yeah. I think if you'd asked me at 18, hey, like how long do you think this will take? If you told me 10 years in, 11 years in, I'd be like finding out new stuff to work on.
Yeah.
I'd be like, what's the point then?
Did you think that the conception that I had on the front end of my work as a client was that I would graduate one day?
Yeah. I had the degree.
It'd be like high school. Like I would spend a fixed amount of time and during that time I would progress.
Yep.
And then my therapist one day would stand up out of his chair, shake my hand.
Yep. And say you're good to go.
And I would walk out of the room and
Yeah. And I think that's an important piece for me. I wanted the validation and affirmation of another person to say, you're good to go. Like you're ready.
Yeah.
Because in my anxious attachment, I trust other people more than I trust myself.
Yeah.
It's a little Adam Young plug from The Place We Find Ourselves.
Which
you're safe, I'm not safe, which is a podcast, a great podcast.
Yeah.
So, like I will trust somebody else saying you're ready, you're healed, you're good to go. And this is also, speaking like Jared today, not just Jared 10 years ago.
That's a very Enneagram 6 thing as well, which is my Enneagram number. And that is a very, very, very common Josh move, is to be presented with some kind of problem or anxiety And instead of trying to discover what reserves of wisdom or what intuition I have around it, to try to farm the problem out. Like there's been many things where I've said to Leanne, hey, I've been thinking or been worrying about this, and I've already called these 5 people, you know, and then she'll say something like, well, what do you think? And I'll be like, I told you, I already called these 5 people.
Yeah. Let me just regurgitate what these people have already said instead of, here's another great plug. This is a Cody Fry lyric. You know, he has a song, Pictures of Mountains, incredible song, but it talks about, I sit in my car outside of restaurants and bars reading about what's inside. I look up opinions on news and religion so I don't have to use my own mind. And it's just this, that's me, maybe not so much with news and religion, but I can do that as well. I want somebody to tell me the right way to do something, you know, the right way, like not just a way, but like the right way. And if you tell me it's the right way, I'll go do it instead of having to trust something in me that says this is the way to go.
So one of your beliefs originally as a client about therapy was, one day this person who has been helping me will give me their seal of approval and I will walk out.
Yep. They'll give me the rubber stamp
with no more problems.
Yep.
So how has that changed since then?
Well, I graduated. I'm just kidding. I wanted to get Josh. I tried to do a spit take with him. I almost got him to spit it onto his computer.
The bummer is that you're my primary tech support. So if that happens, you'd be getting a call.
You got nobody. You'll be starting the podcast on your phone. I mean, I used to think that the person with the healing power is the person that I'm going to see. Being the person that people come to see, I have learned that the healing power rests in who is coming to the office, right? So it's not somebody coming in, I am doing something to fix them, which at times as a clinician is incredibly frustrating because I want to be able to fix people. My ego would love to be able to say, oh, look at this client and I did this and it fixed them. Like that's my own stuff I have to continue to work through. But it's so freeing to recognize I, as the clinician, do not have the power to change. It's up to the client and what they bring into the room. And so, for me, my perception of power in the room has shifted because, like I said, I wanted that person to be the healing agent and realizing, like, they're not the person that's going to fix me. And not even that I'm going to fix me, but like God is going to use this setting and do a work in me that I can't and won't to do for myself.
I think that's one of the most powerful things I've heard in my whole time doing this show. You said,
Josh, that's why I get paid the big bucks.
You get paid?
You're paying. No, I'm just kidding. No.
I used to think the person with the healing power is the person I'm going to see. And I think that I would echo that being a client in therapy at the beginning, I thought I was going to get fixed. Being a therapist, I have learned that. So the way that I've conceptualized it is, if I give out an easy answer, I'm robbing the client of their change. Because I think back to my time as a client pre-grad school, and I can point to, and you know what's so funny is I was thinking about this, I want to say yesterday or the day before. The first time that I met you was in 2013. In December of 2013, I came up to visit Todd. You had gone on a trip, I think, to Florida.
I just moved to Nashville.
Yeah. I think you had gone back home to Florida or something.
Yep, I did. I went back home for a wedding.
And the last night that I was there, you had come back. I had been staying in your room. And for some reason you were like, nah, bro, you just keep staying in there. I'll sleep on the couch. And that was so almost 7 years ago. But that was also April to 8 months into, from 8 months from the time that I had started therapy. And I, at the time, was thinking, just like you said, I'm going to get fixed. Like, they're going to give me some secret of life that I haven't found out about yet. And I'm going to get fixed. And I remember the struggle of change. I remember, which, to reference what I said earlier, a lot of that struggle was finding out what was inside of me. It wasn't tracking down an answer. But as a therapist, realizing, well, if I just give out an easy answer, I rob a person of their struggle, which is the thing that comes, which brings change.
And there's something too for therapists listening. I'm notorious. I would say, like, I'm notorious at doing exactly what Josh has said, at like giving answers. And so, you know, there is work that can be done on the client side to get to giving an answer. And if you as a clinician give an answer, if they're not ready for it, they'll mature into it. There's so much stuff that there were quote unquote answers that I learned at 18, 19, 20, early on, before I even had a fully developed brain, that I'm maturing into at 27, 28, 29. And so just because somebody may have given me an answer, or I learned it in grad school, and I have it up here, experience is the teacher. Like, that's the thing that changes in the room. When I'm with clients, it's not what I tell them or teach them. It's them being able to experience, like me telling them they're safe and experiencing safety are two very different things.
Yeah.
Only 20% of the change that happens in a client's life is a result of a specific intervention. So that could be psychoeducation, that could be brain spotting, CBT, EFT, doesn't matter. That's only 20% of the change that happens in a client's life. The other 80% is the relationship they have with me, or the relationship they have with you, Josh, or whoever's listening as a therapist, right? 80%. So me telling them they're safe and giving that specific intervention, it doesn't matter how good I am at that intervention. That's only 20% of the work. But them being able to experience safety with me will dramatically change their life. And I think that's the biggest thing I learned from what I thought therapy was going to be like to what it actually is like. Like, what causes the change? I was thinking, man, I'm going to learn all these interventions.
Yeah.
I got EMDR, I got brain spotting, I got grad school, I got da-da-da-da-da. And it's like, that's not what heals. What heals is my ability to be in the room and listen and tell the truth and give feedback and let somebody be in pain and let them know, like, I'm not going anywhere.
I think that's the key to that. Is it's not just allowing somebody to have their own pain as a clinician. It's to remain with them in it.
Yeah.
While the trickiest thing with a clinician is, how do you let somebody go through what they're going through while not trying to fix it, but still being with them in it? How do you companion instead of repair or fix or solve?
Yeah, it's the scene of a mom who's watching her kid ride a bike, and the kid falls off and scrapes his knee, and the mom comes over and says, "You're okay, let's get back up on the bike and we'll, keep riding. And some people, when they hear that, they're like, yeah, that's what a mom does. That's super maternal. And what's actually happening, right, when that kid falls and scrapes his knee, that kid is not all right. That kid has fluid coming out of his knee in screaming pain, and that fluid's supposed to stay inside of his body, right? There's blood coming out. It's not supposed to do that, right? And so for a mom to come over and say, "You're okay, get back up on the bike and keep riding," that's invalidating that kid's experience. And what's happening is, when I tell that story and I think of somebody scraping their knee, there's like a little bit of pain that happens in me, right? that's empathy. That's how our mirror neurons work. And so mom's inability to sit with the pain of her kid being in pain is going to try to get her kid out of the kid's pain so she doesn't have to be in pain.
She's experiencing anxiety.
Yeah.
Watching her kid.
Or even like with those mirror neurons, like when you see somebody, like I do this with fail videos. When I see somebody just eat it, right?
Watch him.
Like you guys can't see this, but Josh just cringed with his, because that's mirror neurons. That's my ability to feel somebody else's pain.
Yeah, I can't do the injury videos. When we were in our retail job before our current job, there was a coworker of ours that every break he had, he would put on.
Love that guy.
No, I'm thinking Lance. He would put on.
Oh, gotcha.
Fail videos on there, and I always had to like move away because I can't.
Yeah, because when somebody's in pain and we see it, we feel it to some degree, and my willingness to feel my own pain will let you have yours. I think that's what needs to be ongoing in clinicians' work, is you have to continue to do the work to be able to be in your own pain so that you can let your client have theirs, instead of trying to take their pain away as the clinician so that you feel better in the room.
Well,
and I know I'm guilty of that.
And practically what that is it's self-regulation and self-soothing. When you've got your own anxiety, when you notice that you've got your own pain, instead of trying to alleviate it by fixing the other person, which is codependency, instead of trying to do that, I'm not okay unless you're okay, noticing what you're feeling, taking what steps you need to take in the moment to either self-soothe or regulate, or do it at a level that can get you through the session to where you can take more steps after. It's what, we tell clients to do all the time. That is our opportunity to do it in the middle of a session is, so it's not even, and that's really what it is. I think a lot of times if we give an easy answer, it can come from a place of, oh man, I'm feeling some tension. Maybe I'm having some countertransference. So if I give you the answer, it lets me calm down.
We can move on.
Yeah. Then we're both okay. Let's talk about a movie.
Let's do it.
What movie did you bring for us to talk about today?
A movie that everybody is super well versed in, well aware of. No, I'm just kidding. It is a movie called Chasing Mavericks. If you have heard of that movie, or better yet, have seen that movie, I'm shocked. It does star famous actor Gerard Butler.
Jerry Butts.
Jerry Butts. That's the reason that I recorded it when I first saw it on my Dish, guide or whatever.
Is it really?
That's the only reason, because I like Gerard Butler, and then I recorded this movie. Probably top 5 movies of all time, either top or top 2 recovery movies. For me, it's kind of like this and Warrior, which is the last movie. Absolutely incredible movie. It's safe, family friendly. It's about a guy who, it's about 2 guys really. Gerard Butler's an older guy. There's a younger guy whose name is Jay Moriarty. He's not Sherlock Holmes's counterpart.
That comes out in the sequel. Yeah.
It's based on a true story. There was actually a surfer named Jay Moriarty. He is famously known as the youngest person to have ever surfed the Mavericks wave, which is off the coast of Santa Monica, I think, is where the movie takes place.
It's actually up near San Francisco. Santa Cruz is where they're at. Yeah,
that's it.
Santa Cruz. So like just north of Santa Cruz is San Jose, which is at the south end of the San Francisco Bay. So if you go south from Santa Fe, you're going to end up in Santa Cruz, and across the bay from Santa Cruz is Monterey. And so they're all in that little.
Yep. So this movie takes place back in like the late 80s, early 90s, before this wave was like well known. Gerard Butler's character is kind of secretly this big wave surfer. And Jay Moriarty he's a 15, 16-year-old boy who's great at surfing. That's kind of his life. It's all he does. and he kind of sneaks onto Frosty, which is Gerard Butler's character's name.
Well, the beginning of the movie, he's actually Jay's younger.
Jay's younger, yeah. So it starts off, he's eight and 3/4. And he actually gets rescued by Frosty, who happened to be surfing at that time. So there's like a meet cute that kind of happens early on, and then it kind of jumps forward. So it'd be like 7 years to where he's a teenager, and he actually sneaks onto Frosty's van when Frosty goes out one morning to surf this wave, and sees Mavericks for the first time. And Mavericks is like a 30-40 foot wave. The actual wave itself, they call it El Nino.
Which I kind of wondered if that was the weather system El Nino, if that's...
So when that weather system comes in is what creates that big wave.
Yeah.
And they call the wave El Nino. But
this is the new direction the podcast is taking. It's going to be meteorological, weather-based.
Weather forecast with Josh and Jared. This episode brought to you by NordVPN. Yeah, so the movie, I don't know if you want to go chronologically in the movie, how you want to.
Well, the first thing I would say is this is a movie I had seen before based on your recommendation.
Yeah, and you thought it was lame.
And I didn't like it before. I didn't think it was lame. I just think it was a good movie. But
it's only got like a 30-something% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Well, but that's
actually if you go into it looking for specific stuff,
that's actually what I was going to say. Is it has a 32% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, but the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is 70%.
That's right. That's right. It is.
So there's and when you
those darn critics
there, when you look on Rotten Tomatoes, it's an attempt to quantify and aggregate opinions. So basically, the people at Rotten Tomatoes, they read a review and they try to, in a binary way, go, is this a good review or a bad review? And they either give it a good or a bad, and then they just stack everything up and see what grade does this thing get. Versus the audience score, it's people like you and me going in and saying, I liked it, I didn't like it. And so when you see these giant disparities, it's the difference between people who watch upwards of 60-something movies a year who are trying to,
that's life right there.
They're trying to, I can tell you it's not, but I was thinking this morning, like, oh yeah, I think, having started up the podcast, I ended up in the same place I was several years before moving to Tennessee, where I'm watching like 60-something movies a year. But it's the difference between somebody who is just cramming movies into their head versus a person who goes in, sees the movie, has time to chew on it and think about it and talk about it with their friends and family. So like 34 versus 70, but I don't think we need to go through it chronologically. We can go through it any way that you want. What is it about? So you said this movie top 5 and it switches between 1 and 2 when it comes to recovery for you. So what is it about this movie that captured you?
It's not a movie about surfing. I want to emphasize that. If you are a surfer, I still think you will enjoy it. Being in a landlocked state in Tennessee and living in Florida on the Gulf side, surfing is pretty much non-existent to me. The movie for me is about, it's really about fatherhood. So Jay Moriarty's character, as an 8-year-old early on in the movie, he comes home after his life is saved, and he sees a letter from his dad. I actually paused it the last time I watched it because the letter is so briefly on the screen, you can't read it unless you were to pause it. And the letter basically says, hey, I'm not coming back to the States. I'll let you know if I think we can work it out. And there's a check from the armed forces for like $400. So we immediately kind of see dad's not in the picture. He goes into the room where his mom is, and she's like basically passed out on the bed. He takes a whiff of a beverage that's on the nightstand, and he clearly like reacts like there's alcohol in it. And so there's kind of these undertones of like dad's not physically present, mom's not emotionally present. And so this kid is just he's really kind of orphaned. I think the average viewer, when they see that, they're probably not going to, that may seem like, oh, that's an extreme example. Well, I'm a therapist, so I'm going to see the implications of all these things down the road. But he doesn't have a dad in his life. And through wanting to surf the wave, Frosty, which is Gerard Butler's character, is actually, when Jay comes to him and says, hey, I want you to show me how to surf that wave. He said, no, I'm not going to teach you how to do that. You're not strong enough. You're not, and Jay's like the best surfer on the beach at 15. Like Frosty even acknowledges that. But he basically says big wave surfing is about what you do when everything goes wrong, not what you do when everything goes right, which is like normal wave surfing. So he leaves that first request of Frosty, and Frosty had rejected him. And then Frosty has this interaction with his wife, who basically says he's going to take that drop whether you teach him how to or not. And so then Frosty kind of marinates on it, and he comes back around and says, all right, this is all we're doing. All I'm going to do, you have 12 weeks until this window for when this wave shows up expires. So I'm going to teach you for 12 weeks. And it starts off, it's like contractual. He actually has Jay's mom, like sign a release of liability, which Jay ended up forging. But like it's so contractual, like there's actually a written document. Frosty's not coming to this from a relational, like I'm wanting to bring this boy into like a relationship with me. It's, I'm going to teach him how to surf this wave so that I don't have his death on my conscience. That's really how it started. Which is really impactful for me, because some of the most meaningful relationships I've made on this planet started in much the same manner. It was like, we're going to have this kind of like, you're coming to me to do this thing. And it develops to something much greater, more beautiful, much wider scope. But I think it's important to realize, like, he was coming to him to teach him how to do this thing. He was not coming expecting a dad. Frosty was not coming expecting a son.
It starts out very much like a teacher or instructor.
It's a mentor relationship. It's a mentor relationship. I'm gonna instruct you on how to do this.
But a very functional, not a life mentor, like a skill-based.
Right.
Like an apprenticeship almost.
It's an apprentice. Yeah. It's the equivalent of, I'm going to apprentice a carpenter. I saw this carpenter build this canoe. It's like me going to Ron Swanson from Parks and Recreation and saying, I saw you build this 12-foot awesome mahogany canoe. I want you to teach me how to build that canoe. And it's like, okay, I will teach you how to build that canoe. Like that's the equivalent of what's happened. I have to have a Parks and Rec plug. I have to do that.
By the way, he's got an actual wood shop that you can buy things from.
He's just the level of human being that I will never attain.
The things are incredibly, like, he has a mustache comb you can buy, which I wanted, but it's like $70 and it's just
it's worth it.
A couple inches of wood. Yeah.
I will turn you boys into men, you men into gladiators, and then from gladiators into Swansons. So the way that Frosty goes about this, I'm going to teach you how to do this. He makes this analogy of, I'm going to help build these 4 pillars, the 4 pillars of a solid human foundation. And those 4 pillars that he talks about, and these are things that I talk about with clients all the time, not because of this movie, but this helps reinforce it, is he's going to develop Jay from a physical standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, from a mental standpoint, and from a spiritual standpoint. These are the 4 pillars of what Gerard Butler would call, Frosty would call, a solid human foundation. And so he sets about helping Jay develop in these 4 areas. And so this includes things like strength conditioning. So by the end of 12 weeks before Jay takes the drop, he has to be able to paddleboard across the entire Bay of Monterey, which is 36 miles. If he cannot do that, then Frosty doesn't sign off on him taking that drop. Taking the drop means like riding the wave.
Going after the wave, yeah.
He has to be able to hold his breath for at least 4 minutes at one time. So there's physical attributes that he has to be able to grow and develop. He has to be able to navigate the tides, shifts, wind, all of these things. And that's tied to the mental piece. But really one of the first scenes, and this is actually a movie when I was at the Refuge Center for Counseling, we had a men's group that it was a core emotions group. And basically each week we would go through one of these primary emotions. And for fear, that was one of the weeks that Pike Williams, who was the group facilitator, I was kind of the co-facilitator. He kind of handed the reins over for the week of fear. And this is the movie that I picked. We would always show a little movie clip, and we'd kind of use it as a kind of a discussion point. And there's a scene where in their kind of training mentorship, Frosty and Jay go free diving so that they can see where this reef is that helps cause the wave to happen. So Frosty wanted Jay to be able to see this and understand it. While they're down there, there's this really powerful scene where they both look up, and there's a great white shark that's swimming relatively close to them, right above them. And visually, you see Jay start to panic. And I always do this work with clients, like, how do we know he's panicking? Like, how do you know you're panicking? How do you recognize that? And so immediately he has a lot of energy. So he starts flailing, like his arms are pumping, his legs are pumping. Immediately, like, air starts to come out, like he's not holding his breath very well. His eyes get really big. So there's all these physiological signs that he's panicking. And what Frosty does, like, Frosty basically reaches over, grabs him, and gets Jay's attention onto Frosty. So he basically, like, he like, Frosty knows the shark is there. He literally grabs Jay and like has Jay look at him until the shark swims by. And then they go up top, and there's this dude with a shotgun, like, on the boat, like he's ready to shoot this shark. So it's like it's like a freaking crazy scene.
Yeah.
And they get out of the boat, and there's this interaction. And this was the first scene I saw where I was like, holy shit, this movie is like, where did this scene come from? And so Gerard Butler asks him, what the hell happened down there? And Jay says, I don't know. I was fear. I was panic, I guess. And Gerard Butler says, well, was it fear or panic? Because those are two separate emotions. Fear is healthy and panic is deadly. Because when you're out here and you're about to face a 30, 40-foot wave, it's all about fear. But if you panic like you did just now, you'll die.
Yeah.
And so Jay asks him, well, if you're scared to death, how do you not panic? And Frosty's response is by identifying the fear and what it is you're scared of. And that moment, that one phrase is like, that's worth watching the movie for me.
Which I think fits in really, really well with the framework that you and I use of the 8 core emotions and the impairments and the gifts, because Frosty is advocating for fear to not be a good or a bad thing, but to recognize that it's a thing. And I would say panic, in the way that he describes it, would fit in with the impairment of fear, which is rage, because it's all about reaction. It's all about, I'm not thinking, I'm just turning on my survival instinct. And that's going to lead, in that case, Jay's survival instinct was like, either swim straight up or flail or, whatever. And what Frosty was doing, kind of pantomiming underwater, was, no, stay still, stay focused, stay with me and wait. Then we'll come up when it's safe.
Yes. And I think that image right there is, for me, that's one of the core, that's one of the core things that that's what cultivates good work with a client. Like, there's something that for me is so powerful, and I could be reading too much into this, and that's totally fine. You can give me feedback on that after the podcast, not on it. Just kidding. But Frosty sees what we see. He sees Jay's dysregulation. Frosty knows the danger. He's not saying don't be scared. He's not like smacking him across the face underwater being like, get your shit together. Like, Frosty sees the dysregulation, and he knows the only thing that will help him regulate is me being regulated and him picking up on my regulation. I use this with, I don't do much work with adolescents now because of my own traumatic experiences working with adolescents, but you know, in working with the parents of adolescents, I let them know, like, that part of the brain, that frontal lobe that helps regulate the emotion, like, your kid doesn't have that yet. You are your kid's prefrontal cortex. You are the frontal lobe, right? So when your kid's dysregulated, them making eye contact with you, their body picking up on your energy, like our hearts emit an electromagnetic field around them that we as human beings, we pick up on. That's how you can walk in a room and can kind of like sense, you know, when somebody's off or somebody's pissed. Like, that's literally like that's a part of that. That's how attuned we can be as humans. And so Frosty knew the way to help regulate Jay was, Jay, focus on me. I'm okay in this moment. Right? I'm not trying to take your fear away. I'm trying to regulate your panic. And there's a big difference there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. The fear is still there. The threat's still there. Like, Frosty's not swimming the other direction. He's not taking out a harpoon gun to shoot the shark down. He's letting the situation unfold while helping Jay say, hey, this is where the safety is going to come, is looking at me.
Well, and he doesn't try to, you know, minimize that feeling of fear that Jay had. He actually does the opposite. He says, you know, you were right to feel afraid.
Yeah.
But, you know, his effort to help Jay regulate, it goes back to when we were in, I think it was lifespan class. I remember Dr. Hopkins talking about the attachment between a mother and child. And it was when we first kind of got our first tastes of attachment theory. You know, the reason why a mother picking up a crying baby, the reason why the baby feels comfort and stops crying, if there's a secure attachment, is that when the mother picks the baby up, the mother's heart rate rises slightly to meet the baby's heart rate. And then as the mother's heart rate comes down, so comes the baby's heart rate as well.
As she is able to regulate herself.
Yes. Yes. And
the baby becomes regulated.
And Hopkins said it. Terry Murphy said it. When you are in the presence of your primary attachment figure, you can regulate 80 times quicker than by yourself. And so, just as you mentioned earlier in our conversation, you know, the therapeutic relationship is the strongest tool for helping, it instigates the only word I can think of, maybe inspire, change in a person, because it's developing a secure attachment. It's developing an active connection. It's developing healthy intimacy so that you can help a person learn regulation in the moment. And that's exactly what he was doing in that moment, was capitalizing on the relationship he had built to help Jay.
And he's modeling too. He's modeling like, hey, like, this is what will make the shark go away. What you're doing right now, that totally natural survival moment, amygdala's firing, prefrontal cortex is offline, that I flip my lid, as Dan Siegel calls it, right? Like, that's how I'm supposed to respond when I see a predator and I'm in his territory, right? So having somebody who I can look at and see, like, oh, he's not flailing. Oh, he's like, his eyes aren't, he's not expelling all this air. Like, it's not invalidating.
Yeah.
Right. It's not the mom going and trying to get him out of it, like we talked about before. It's, hey, I'm letting you know, like, just breathe. Well, don't breathe because you're in the water. But like, hey, like, we're gonna be okay. Just look at me. He even like holds up a 1. Like, we're gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Right. We're not okay versus we're gonna be okay. Sounds like a subtle difference. We're okay when somebody's not okay can be invalidating. Right. It's the kid who scraped his knee. You're okay. No, I'm not. No, the hell I'm not. Do I need to go to the hospital? I don't know. Is this gonna you have to cut my leg off? I don't know what's required here. That's what's going through a kid's brain when they scrape their knee. So we're going to be okay. Lets me be in the now where it's not okay. And I think that's what's modeled in that scene between Frosty and Jay, where it's like, hey, we're going to go up there. We're going to go up there. Just 1 minute. We can't go up there yet. I'm going to be here with you.
Yeah.
I'm going to help keep you safe. I'm going to help regulate you. And then he actually pushes Jay up first. Like he sends him up. He says, okay, now it's okay.
He Lion Kings him.
All the copyright infringement. Let's just get them all in there.
Yeah. We'll cover all the bases today. Yeah. I think that is a really profound part. I think that all of these areas that Frosty was working on with Jay, the physical, the mental, the spiritual, the emotional, the exercises that he has Jay employ in these things, I think was teaching him reflection and intention. Like I think about, he had him write, I think 2 or 3 essays.
So he had him write one, which he wrote about the wrong subject. So he wrote about a girl he was interested in when he was supposed to, in Frosty's opinion, he was supposed to write about a wave. So he has him rewrite it. And then at the end, Jay actually writes him a letter, like a personal letter. So it's not part of the assignment, and that's where, that's right before, like he hands it to Frosty right before he goes out to surf El Nino. Like this is what happens right before. And so he's like reading, there's this like overdubbing of Jay reading this letter while he's surfing, while Frosty's watching. And there's this hugely emotional moment where, incrementally we've seen how this relationship has become more that it's more relational than transactional, right? It's not, you're just teaching me how to survive this wave. I think one of the big shifts that we see in that direction is when Frosty's wife dies.
Oh my gosh, I had forgotten,
dude, total left field,
about
right?
that part.
Yeah. So if, by the way, I don't know if we've said this already, there's all spoilers in this. So if you
No. People that are listening know if you click on it, because the name of the movie's in the episode. So if you click on it, especially if the movie came out 8 years ago. Yeah,
it's not like something we watched opening night and the next day we're talking about it. So Frosty's wife dies suddenly. She has a stroke. And you don't even like know that she dies until you see, it's like she has this episode. You see her face kind of go half limp, which is very characteristic of a stroke. The camera cuts to black. Camera comes back up, and it just shows Frosty in like a black suit, and you're just like, wait, what? Like it's so there's no signs of unhealth on her. It's just really out of left field.
Yeah.
And Frosty begins this process. Like you really get to see how he struggles with his emotion and struggles with connection, because Jay at one point comes up, and they've been doing all this work and training, and Frosty is so overwhelmed with his grief in this moment that he says, go away. And Jay's kind of like a whipped dog. He's like, oh, damn. And he just goes away. Like Frosty in this moment is like he's so overcome with his grief. He's really unavailable. And there's this moment that happens where Frosty doesn't show up for his training like he's supposed to. And so Jay has to go hunt him down.
Which up until then, when the training starts, he had said, you show up at my shed at 6:30, not 6:31, not 6:32.
6:31, not 6:32.
So one of his kind of hallmarks as a person was punctuality.
Yeah. There's one point where Jay shows up late because he's having to be kind of the surrogate husband to his, and we didn't really talk about much of the family dynamic with Jay, but he really like over functions for mom, who's kind of under functioning. She maybe struggles with alcoholism. She struggles to maintain a job, all these things. So she's like running late for work. He's like pouring her coffee, getting her shower going, all this kind of stuff. and then he ends up being late, and Frosty kind of comments on that. He's like, you're 11 minutes late. So punctuality was always something very important.
Mm-hmm.
And then he doesn't show up, and so Jay immediately knows something's off.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jay gets this hunch that, like, he sees that one of the paddle boards is missing, and so Jay just books it and starts paddleboarding out into Monterey Bay. No idea where Frosty's at. And this is right after Frosty had died. The funeral had just happened. And so this for me is, I think, probably, as I kind of tear up thinking about it, this for me is probably the single most, for me, the most important scene of the whole movie, even more so than the fear and panic scene. So Jay's going out. He happens to find Frosty, which is like a miracle. This bay is 36 miles across, people. So the odds of him finding, they'd spent weeks out here paddleboarding. They'd been together, so he kind of knows his routes, all that. So he literally runs into Frosty.
Which I thought was a little bit crazy because he's on top of the water. The water's still where he's at. So for me, I was thinking, you're swimming out there looking. You should just be able to see. It's not like you're looking down on the ground trying to find a penny that you dropped.
Yeah.
But keep going.
So he adjusts, actually using some of the tools that Frosty taught him. Like, he noticed that the tide was going a certain way. So he adjusted course, found where the current was going. And so he thought, well, maybe Frosty's just drifting with the current. So he followed the current, found Frosty, and Frosty is just in this really despair pit, which who wouldn't be, right? Frosty at this point has 2 kids. You see early on in the movie where he struggles to really be there and feel like he has enough to be a dad. He didn't have much access to Frosty's dad because Frosty's dad died when he was a boy. And so he has this sense of inadequacy of like, I'm not enough. Now my wife is gone. She was the one that was always great with the kids. How am I going to raise these kids on my own? All this stuff. And so he's out there kind of pit of despair, and Jay finds him, and there's this exchange that happens, and Frosty kind of makes this sarcastic jibe about what happens when I'm not strong enough? What pillar do I lean on then? Referencing those 4 pillars, right? The physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. And this is, I think, going back to attachment theory, what the work of a clinician is, what healthy relationship attachment is. He asked the question, even mocking his own worldview of like my own worldview isn't enough. Which pillar do I lean on then? And Jay says the 5th pillar. And he asks him, well, which pillar is that? Like Frosty's like, what are you talking? There's only 4 pillars. What's the 5th pillar? And Jay says, me. And I've said this a number of times with clients. What clients are going through is often too much for them.
Yeah.
It is too big. It's too big for one person, but it's not too big for 2 people. And so having them come in and be in the presence of somebody who can be with them and help, not out of over functioning, not out of, I'm going to carry this for you, not Sam lifting up Frodo, carrying him up Mount Doom. There's another copyright reference. I'm going to carry you all the way, but like you can lean on me, and I'll help be support when you don't have enough pillar to lean on in and of yourself. And so they kind of resume training. This is literally like right before they actually, in this scene, Jay had already paddled more than 18 miles into Monterey Bay because he felt where they had passed this specific trench.
Yeah.
Do you know the name of the trench?
Nope.
I thought your California knowledge might have.
I was Southern California. Yeah, I wasn't Northern. Yeah.
So they passed this trench, which means that they have already paddled more than 18 miles across the bay, which means that they have less distance in front of them than behind them. So they actually paddle the rest of the way across the trench. And that's kind of this scene of, okay, you've built up this mental barrier of being able to navigate the current and find me. You've built up this emotional barrier of being able to sit with me. You've now shown that you've met the physical requirements of being able to accomplish this task. And I mean, they don't do a whole lot of spiritual work, but I think there's spiritual and kind of all the stuff that they're doing, because I don't think we're siloed.
I think spiritual in this case is recognizing that a person, this kind of goes to 12-step language about a higher power. A higher power isn't necessarily speaking of God, but it's meant to combat the habit of only being concerned with the 6 feet of space that's around me, thinking that the world revolves around me. Yeah. And so it's really meant to say your life has to be bigger. It has to be about something bigger than just you. And what that gives you is a sense of purpose. It gives you a drive. And so I think for Jay, the spiritual thing kind of encompassed the others, because for him, the drive, he said at one point, do you ever feel like you were put here on the earth for a reason? My reason is to ride this wave,
to surf this wave.
That was his spiritual.
Yeah. Yeah. And in that, like, I think my own personal experience, like, I know the healing that comes from 12 steps. For me, I know my defined higher power is Christ. Like, I know that ultimately that's where my healing comes from. And, like, I need God with skin on, meaning like, yes, Christ is my ultimate higher power. And he also left me the church, and I need people that I can see and like touch with my hands, who can also like be God and Christ to me. So that could be that example of a higher power. That could be a therapist. It could be a life coach. It could be a sponsor. It could be a pastor. It could be just a friend. It could be a parent. Something that is outside, greater than me, meaning outside of myself, that I'm willing to take a good orderly direction. God.
Yeah. And another
good orderly direction.
In another way too, Frosty was in that moment. Frosty was that for him too. It's what is it that's going to call me to show up other than my own desires?
Yeah.
And so the spiritual aspect for Jay was really kind of a filling out of his life, kind of giving him direction besides just whatever whims he had in the moment.
Yeah. And spoiler alert, he does surf the wave. Like I said, it's based on a true story. Jay Moriarty was an actual person. He was the youngest person to surf this wave. I don't know if he still is. He was 16 when he surfed it. There's actually, I think it's the cover. It was the cover of the surfing magazine. I think it was the cover of the surfing magazine. The first time he goes up on the wave, he wipes out in like a really bad wipeout. And the picture that is in the movie, if I'm not mistaken, of the board flipping up underneath him is actually the picture that was in the magazine. Oh, wow. I'm not sure if it was the cover of the magazine or was just in the story, but that's an actual picture of the real Jay's board, like flipping up as he wiped out the first time. And right before he goes out, I kind of mentioned this, there's a scene where, and this is like the culmination of how we know this is progressed, not transgressed. This is progressed from a transaction to a real, like, this is a surrogate father. Like, this is the dad. I forgot to mention this. There's a scene when his wife is saying he's going to surf that wave. His wife has this incredible insight. And she says, there are all kinds of sons, Frosty. Some are born to you and some just occur to you. And it's just like this foreshadow of like this is where this is going to head. And I don't think Frosty was able to put that together. But then there's the scene at the beach right before he goes out and surfs this wave. And Jay gives him this letter. And it's just Jay talking about how, like, all of the stuff that Frosty had given to him. And he really filled this role without either of them ever realizing it. Like he was Frosty's, or he was Jay's dad. and not in a biological way, but in a way, and I think sometimes not to an unhealthy dynamic, ideally, but a lot of therapy is reparenting clients, right? It's offering things like, if I'm doing attachment work, really all I'm doing is work that they didn't get from their parents.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm a source of groundedness, that's the corrective emotional experience. That's the EFT language we use, right? If I'm offering that to them and that's corrective, really it's just something that they needed from their parents that they didn't get.
Yeah.
So I don't go into it thinking I'm all my clients' dad, because that would be really weird and kind of twisted and unhealthy. But in some ways, that's kind of the dynamic of what's happening. I'm helping offer you something that you needed that you didn't get, that you can get now. And sure, it's not going to be the instant healing. It's not going to build your attachment template the way it would have when you were 1 or 2 years old, when it was still being really malleable, but it's still a corrective emotional experience that will change you. And that's what both of them got to have. Frosty got to have that towards Jay, but I think that's what's so attractive to me about this movie is Jay got to have that with Frosty. And then tragically at the end of the movie, and this is part of the true story, Jay was freediving in the Maldives and actually ended up drowning.
Yeah.
And so the end of the movie is actually this water-based surfing funeral for Jay. It just kind of talks about that very briefly. Like
It's
after he
like
surfs the
it's
wave.
like a chyron that appears.
Yeah.
It's got some shots of him not doing the actual, well, it is free diving, but not,
Yeah.
it doesn't like show his death, but just him underwater, kind of portraying him being at peace and having found what he was looking for.
Yeah. And so he ends up actually dying I think he died when he was 16. No,
it says
no,
the
he died
title
at
card
18.
says,
it was 2 years later.
Oh, I thought it said 7 years later. I thought he died when he was 22, but I'm not
That
good
may
at
be
math,
right.
so.
That may be where I'm getting the number 2 from.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was free diving in the Maldives and ended up dying. So like it's not that it ends on that sad note, but really you see like he in kind of his words and what you were just talking about, he kind of did what he came to do from his perspective, his felt sense of like, this is why I'm here. But more importantly, I don't think him being here, surfing that wave, and this is kind of the spiritual component, it wasn't about the wave.
Yeah.
Like in my lens,
the wave was inside of us the whole time.
No. Not even about that. Like for me in my addiction, like my recovery isn't about my sobriety from sex, right? The reason that I have this struggle, the reason God hasn't snapped his fingers and taken me out of it, the method of how I got to, the journey of how I got to my quote unquote goal of sobriety or recovery, whatever, was the relationships that came into my life along the way. I tell my clients, like, I've met my pallbearers, like the people that will carry me. If, some of them are, 20 years older than me. So they may die long before I do. But you're doing math in your head right now.
I am.
So I
think I'm only 11 years, but okay, cool.
Yeah. I've met my pallbearers in the program, in doing this work, in this journey. I met these people that I would never have met had I not had this struggle. And so I think Jay's sense of the wave is why I was put on this earth, for me, it's like, no, like the wave was just the end. And really the means was really the end. The connection that he made with Frosty, and the relationship and the healing that came from that, and his ability to attach to him, like we can't exist in a vacuum as human beings. We have to have connection and relationship. Ultimately, that's where our meaning comes from. I think if I were to interview Jay and ask him, what was more important to you, making that drop or your relationship with Frosty? I think hands down, no questions asked, he would say my relationship with Frosty.
That I have come across something this year that I have been thinking about a lot, and I think it was best conceptualized. I read this book last month, I think at the beginning of the month, called Stillness is the Key, which is kind of an introductory book by Ryan Holiday on Stoicism. And he talks about this Buddhist principle, chop wood, carry water, chop wood, carry water, chop wood, carry water. And it's basically saying to focus on the process, not the product, the process, not the result. And I think it speaks to what you're saying about this relationship. The relationship may have been incited by pursuit of surfing the wave, but it evolved into something greater.
Yeah.
And ultimately, riding the wave was a great experience for Jay.
Yeah, hands down.
But ultimately, the relationship up until that point, but even then, I would imagine continuing on past it, the relationship wasn't a event like the wave was. The relationship was an ongoing experience of healthy intimacy. It was doing life with another person and bringing his true authentic self to the table, experiencing Frosty's authentic self, receiving from his authentic self into his, and that is life. That's the essence of life, is that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's kind of focusing on the here and now, like I'm not, it doesn't matter why I'm chopping this wood. I want to chop this wood in this moment the best that I can. It doesn't matter why I'm carrying this water. I want to carry this water because I want to be at peace in this moment while I chop and carry, but also after when I've attained whatever goal. But to say my peace is going to be at the end robs you of my peace is going to be in the moment. So, Jay wasn't just like, oh, well, I'll breathe in and relax when I finish riding the wave.
Right.
He was experiencing, and that moment on the paddle boards after Frosty's wife died, that's a great example of that. Like he could have just said, well, shoot, dude, he's not here for my training this morning.
Yeah.
I better go out and train because it's all about the wave.
Yep. Yeah. And going back to that spiritual component, like I think the putting of the wave into Jay's heart, right? Like that sense of this is why I'm here. Like I think at first Jay's like, yeah, that's why I'm here. And God's up there like, yep, I know that you think that's why you're here. But what you're going to get out of it is way bigger than just surfing that. You're going to get to surf the wave and it's going to be epic and it's going to be a life-changing event and you're going to be right. I mean, he became famous across the entire world for this thing that he did. And I think that was like, whereas we would see the relationship with Frosty as the means to the end of surfing the wave. And for me, I think the surfing the wave was the means to the relationship with Frosty as the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's just flipped. And I think that's really that's why when I watch this movie and apparently even talk about the movie, I tear up because it's like people who come to this movie and see it as it's about surfing, they're going to give it a 35% on Rotten Tomatoes because the linear plot line of the movie looks like that's the end. And for people like you and me, or at least me, who are considered like more of kind of a relationship emotional outlier, right? We're kind of the weirdos, or at least I'm kind of the weirdo with how much I talk about relationship and attachment, all this stuff. It's not typically talked about. Like I see it the other way. It's like, no, like the wave was just his ability to get to Frosty, not Frosty was his ability to get to the wave. And that's what I think is so impactful about this movie.
Yeah. I mean, I think like storytelling wise, the wave was his inciting incident to action. It was the hero's call out of the typical. It was his call out of the comfortable. It was the call out of what he's always known. And, just like at the end of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the hobbits come back to the Shire, but the hobbits are different.
Yep.
Shire's the same.
Yep.
Hobbits are different. And so, like, in this case, Jay rides the wave, but he's a different person from the journey that he took to do that.
Yep.
And I think that, like, I don't think it's coincidental that talking about this movie as well as talking about Warrior, like we did last year, that it ends up with one or both of us tearing up, because I think these two movies for you, and I know that I think truthfully this one is one that I'm going to continue thinking about past our conversation today, but I think that it mirrors parts of our stories. Like the plots of these movies touch on things that we've been through. And I think that that's one of, if not the best thing about movies and stories, is it allows us to almost kind of zoom out, take a different perspective on an aspect of a story that may be the same or similar to something that we've gone through, but to see it from a different distance, to see it from a different perspective, and thereby experience it differently, think about it differently, instead of being inside the bottle, looking at the back of the label, kind of seeing the label from the outside. And I think that's a powerful, thing that therapy can do as well, is it just allows a different kind of perspective and experience. I wonder if you can tell me, speaking of that, something that your clients have taught you.
I was talking about this with my supervisor just last week. I had a client who was just very, very complimentary and very, like, said something along the lines of, like, I hope one day he's hoping to go to grad school and become a therapist as well. He said something along the lines of, I hope one day I'm half the therapist you are. And in my shame, like, I didn't really know how to, like, I just accepted the compliment, but for me, there's this sense of inadequacy. There's this imposter syndrome that comes up. There's this, if you even knew half the therapists I know, all that comparison crap comes up for me. And so I remember talking about that with my supervisor, and her encouragement was, well, I wonder if he's getting so much out of this, not because of how good you are as a therapist, but because of how willing he is to do the work. So it's more about him being a great client than you being a great therapist. And I think that's something that I have learned a very small amount of. I've just dipped my toe in the water. And I think I will be learning much more of, both in the near future and long-term, working with clients, is the quote unquote work, like how successful I am as a therapist in a client's life, is not based on how good I am. That's not an excuse for me to be like a lazy therapist or not be trained or any of those things. But really, it's not about me. If a client experiences change, man, it's really just because they were a good client. Which I think knocks my ego down, if I'm honest. I want to be known as a good therapist. And it's also incredibly relieving to know, like, man, I don't got to perform every time I come in the room. Like, if you didn't have a great session, I mean, yeah, sure, I might have blown it, because that's possible. There are bad therapists out there. Trust me, I've heard a crap ton of stories of, like, there's sometimes I just ask clients, they said, what?
Yeah.
Your client did what? Or your therapist did what? And I'm sure that my clients will say that to future therapists about me. But
Wait a minute.
It was,
I'm going to catch you right there. There's no self-shaming in this dojo.
oh no, I'm all about self-shame. Come on
Well, nope, not in this house. You're not.
No, I mean, I think there's a recognition of like, there are clients I've had who I've had a one and done with, meaning they saw me, they saw me one time and then never came back. And I'm sure that they'll have found somebody that's a better fit for them. And because
But
I'm
you don't
not,
know that. But you don't know that was about you.
Josh, I know all things. Okay. No,
No.
I'm just kidding.
That could have been about them. It could have been they weren't ready. There's a million things.
Yeah, sure.
But circling back to what you were saying.
Yeah. I think the thing that I've learned is that it's not about me in the room. I'm not there to have my ego stroked about how good I am as a therapist. The success of my practice will not be, it doesn't rest on me. Ultimately, it rests on God. But in addition to that, it's really more about, is the client who's coming in ready and willing to really work? And clients come in varying degrees of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some clients are ready and willing, but the way that shows up or looks may be different than how other clients are. And so it was encouraging, humbling, and relieving to know, like, oh man, like my success is really based on the client and not on me as a clinician. So I think that was something that's been really helpful for me to learn.
How have your clients taught you that?
How have they taught me that?
Yeah.
I just gave you an example, didn't I? No. How have they taught me that? Well, yeah, I think there's client, like, in the history of my clients, there have been some that are, like, I would classify for me personally in my own stuff as harder than others. And for me, I kind of internalized that and said, what am I doing wrong? Like, what am I doing to make this harder? Why am I not using better interventions? Why am I not, you fill in the blank?
Yeah.
And I think looking back and saying that was less about me than it was about them.
So it's no, keep going.
And conversely, like I said, the client who said, man, you're basically like, you're a great therapist. Like, I also can't take credit for that. Not that I can't take credit for that, but it doesn't stroke my ego as much when I realize that, man, them getting a lot out of therapy is more about them doing the work, not me.
Mm-hmm.
So to all my clients who ever think I'm a great therapist, it's really because you're a great client.
Well, but also if you think about, like, the statement behind what he's saying, he's really just expressing appreciation.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of that whole, like, Brene Brown said on an episode of Dax Shepard's podcast, when a client asks her what she thinks, she's had therapists before that have said something along those lines. Well, it doesn't matter what I think, but really what that client could be, because of, they're convinced, well, I got to follow the rules. Like, I got to redirect it back on him. But she said, really what that is an invitation for connection.
Yeah. It's relationship.
Yeah. And so for her, she doesn't ever want to do the thing where she's like, well, it doesn't matter what I think, we're here for you, because she feels like that's dismissive and kind of shaming. Like, oh, no, you've broken a rule of therapy.
Well,
don't do that.
It's experience. Like I can model for them what intimacy looks like. They're wanting to know what's going on inside of me.
Yes.
And so I can have a corrective emotional experience of what's going on inside of me by sharing that with you.
Yeah. And so
sure, there are ways we learn in grad school of, like, how to do that without, like, over disclosing and all of that. But yeah, I'm much more along the lines of, when a client asks me, what do you think? There's that knee jerk, like, oh, this is supposed to be about them.
Yeah.
kind of moment, because that's what we hear all the time in grad, like, don't disclose, don't da da da.
Yeah.
And not that that's a bad or wrong thing. But yeah, it's like, let's be relational here.
Yeah. But what your client was just trying to do was recognize and express, you have been present for his change, and he deeply appreciates that. That's, so tell me something that you do to take care of yourself.
Yeah, this is one of those questions again that you said you were going to ask me, and I've been trying to think about. So I watch this show called Alone. Um, that is a show on the History Channel. So here's another plug. But there's this. So the show is basically they take 10 trained survival experts, they drop them off in the wilderness like miles apart, so they're all alone, and they are allowed to bring 10 items, and it's last man standing for $500,000. So it's crazy awesome show, and in watching the show, the contestants always talk about how everything they do is like it's a calorie count, right? It's all about calories.
Mm-hmm.
So is it worth it to build this structure knowing it's going to have a payoff, but also knowing it's going to cost me a crap ton of calories, and I may not get enough fish or small game or whatever to be able to replenish that? So there's this constant ebb and flow of, is this worth it? It's like this risk reward kind of game that they're constantly playing around calories. And so after watching that for a season, I like really kind of understood that concept. Season 2 comes around, and there's this guy who's ex-military. And I say that because he's the last person on this season that I would have thought would do something like this. The camera cuts to him, and he's got a log that's about the width of his hips. And he's got some paracord, and he's just kind of like shaving this thing down. And he ends up making a swing out of it. And he hangs a swing, and he just starts swinging, and he's like laughing, and he's screaming, and he's having a good time. And it threw me off so much because it was the first time ever that I had seen somebody in this life or death kind of situation in this show expend calories for no other purpose than to have fun.
Play.
Like, it was recreation.
Yeah.
And not only was it like I found something, or I'm doing something that also has this added health benefit, it was I'm actually going to spend something. It's going to cost me something for no other gain than pleasure, than fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I was watching this right as kind of the pandemic hit, and but to your question, how do you self-care? I've really tried to look at and find something or things in this season, which is dragging out and becoming a much longer season, that was not only something that had like other benefits to it. Like for me, walking would typically be something like when somebody asks me, what do you do for self-care? Oh, I walk by myself. I walk my new dog. Like, there's things, but that has an added benefit as well, right? Like it's healthy and it's active, and it's like, so what is something that I have found that I do that adds zero other tangible benefits other than like, what do I do just for the fun of it, right? If I were to ask my niece or nephew something that they do that they enjoy, they're likely not going to have this underlying logical reason of, oh, well, it also benefits this area of my development. Mm-hmm. They're going to do things because they have fun.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of some ongoing inner child work that I do. So for me, a few of those things, like I love Harry Potter. If you know anything about me, I can't believe we've gone for this long and I haven't had a Harry Potter plug.
Well, you did mention Tonks. I mean,
well, I mentioned that I have a new puppy. So her name is Tonks. And she's named after a Harry Potter character. For those of you, when she's in trouble, I call her Nymphadora. And there's that quote in the movie, "Don't call me Nymphadora," right? So that's her name when she's in trouble. She goes by Tonks, and I love listening to Harry Potter on Audible. So that's something I do. Like, there's other things I can listen to. There's other I could call people or do other things, but for me, there's something that's just really calming and relieving and regulating about listening to Harry Potter. Mm-hmm. And it does not add any other utility to my life. Watching Parks and Recreation, like there's other more productive things I can be doing. And sometimes like it's helpful for me to do something for no other reason than it's fun. Like cleaning the house, like it's relieving in some ways, but it's also an added benefit of, well, I'm also cleaning my house, right? So what can I do, like that guy from that show Alone, that serves no other purpose and actually costs me something for the purpose of having fun. And so those have just been a few things: watching TV, listening to a book, playing.
But it also
Call of
sounds
Duty.
like it's not just these activities, but it's the intentional
Yes.
choosing.
And it's hard. That part of me comes up, that shame productivity monster comes up that says, you should be doing something else.
Yeah.
Like I tell clients, if you experiment with this and you try this, that's going to come up.
Yeah.
That part of you that when you sit or you take a nap or you do something that you feel shame about, like, oh, I should be more productive. That's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And know that you are investing in your being by being able to just be and not do. And part of being is recreating, right? Recreation, whether that's drawing or reading or napping or something that ideally doesn't have any other production behind it. Like there's no way that I can link napping to productivity, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no possible way.
Actually, there's a lot of research. I've read, I think, 3 books this year.
Don't tell me, because then I won't be able to nap. It'll be no, I'm just kidding.
Well, no, I mean, there's a lot of research that shows because when you sleep, due to REM rest and even due to just rest, that it allows, it's like when we used to have to defrag hard drives and PCs, it allows your brain to reorganize, and it actually helps you think clearer and better.
Yes. You're resetting the NVRAM for those of you like Apple geeks out there who know what I'm talking about. You're doing a quick pre-RAM reset. You're just kind of, I mean, Josh, I'm sure can talk all about the benefits of sleep and all those things. And for me, a part of my narrative historically has been, if you nap, you're lazy.
Yeah.
Right. So it's an active, intentional step to step into that shame of, I'm not being productive, I'm being lazy, and do something for me that is costing me potential productivity points, and yet is self-care. And I think it's one of the hardest things that's forced people to, in this pandemic, in this isolation, we don't have the means of doing productive things as much. And it's driving us crazy. It's butting up against that productivity paradigm of, I'm a human doing, and when I don't do, I don't have value, versus I'm a human being and I can sit and do nothing and still be doted on and excited about and loved on by God. And he's not up there like, well, they should be doing something productive for my kingdom, or they should be doing something to be more productive. It's like, no, I'm just as loved and valued when I produce nothing as when I produce something.
Yeah.
And if I don't believe that, then that shows me I need to do more work around my being as a human being, rather than my identity in being a human doing.
Yeah. And I think that if you get to that place where you can accept that your value is found in who you are, not what you do, I think it grants you access to this place where you are freed to do different kinds of things. Things that your heart is really in, other than, as opposed to things that you believe others want. And by doing them, it secures your spot or grants you access. So let's say that somebody was listening to today's show and they're thinking to themselves, as they should be, that Jared is amazing. I would like to become his client, or I'd like to recommend somebody I love to be his client. How can they best get a hold of you?
You can, so there's a couple options. I have a private practice where I'm, for the time being, seeing a handful of clients who are comfortable with it in person in my office in Brentwood, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville. It's actually right across the hallway from Josh's office.
I was going to say, that's a change since last time, is that now we're neighbors professionally.
Yep. So we're in the same building, which is awesome. So you can find me on Psychology Today, which is kind of like a search engine for therapists. You can see my page on there. You can see my goofy picture and just a little bit about my practice and kind of who I work with. It has my email on there. I'll just plug it here as well. So it's just Jared Farley, JaredFarley, MFT. gmail.com. So, like I said, that's on the Psychology Today website. You can find it there. I think Josh might put that in the podcast link as well in the description. Yep. And then I'm also a coach. So I do some life coaching through a ministry called Tin Man. So that website is tinmanministries.org.
Is it Tin Man or Tin Men?
Tin Man, okay. MAN. So you can, if you do a Google search of me, you'll find me either on Psychology Today or Tin Man. So if you're outside of the state of Tennessee, I can't, because of licensure issues, do counseling with you, but I can do coaching with you. I do it through Zoom. And so I do a lot of that. I've got guys literally all over the U.S. I've got a guy in Alaska. I've got kind of all four corners of the U.S. So if that's something you're interested in, you can find me. My email is Jared, Jared, at tinman.life, Life. So you can find me there as well.
At tinman.life, what?
It's instead of .com, it's .life.
Oh,
so
cool.
That's the domain.
Cool, okay.
Yep. So Jared at tinman.life. I think that's it, right? I'm looking at you like you would know.
I don't know. You got anything else you want people to experience?
Yeah. So Tin Man, private practice. That's kind of all I got.
Nice. Yeah. Well, dude, as I said last time, you are amongst my favorite people on earth. One of my groomsmen have been an incredible friend for 7 years. And I just love you to death. And I think just the absolute most of you. And I shot you a text a few days ago just saying, it would be impossible for me to be where I am in my life had you not been a part of it. So thank you so much for giving your time and coming on and talking. It just means the most to me, and I'm just so thankful for you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks for having me back again.
All right. Take care, buddy.
See you.
Thanks so much for joining me this week in the theater. I'll make sure I save a seat for you and a friend next week. Let's raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say that for this week, the theater is closed.